Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation, around the world, and of course in quarantine. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast, aptly named, and have a little special podcast for you today because my first guest, before we get to Boston, you know him as Austin Ward, my cohort at LettermenRow.com, scooper of scoopsters. I've got a little special guest by the name of Urban Meyer. Maybe you've heard of him. He was a coach of some repute for 15, 17 years, and lost only 9 games in 7 seasons at Ohio State University before stepping away from the game again primarily because of some physical ailments he was dealing with at the time. I'm talking about the end of the 2018 season. Turned the reins over ably to Ryan Day, and who took the team back to the college football playoffs last year. So there's a lot to get to with Urban Meyer before we move on and pick up the pace with Boston. You know him as Austin Ward. So without further ado, here's my interview with Urban Meyer.
And as promised, ladies and gentlemen, we're back with one of the great college football coaches of all time, not just of the last couple of decades, Urban Meyer, who's ensconced, I think. Urban, you're kind of ensconced in your compound down in Florida at the moment, correct?
I am. We never really spent more than 4 or 5 days here at a time, but we've been here 6 weeks, and what a great area.
Yeah. What do you think about this whole thing, though, Urban? How tough has it been to stay inside, so to speak, or to keep your travels down, et cetera, during this COVID-19 situation?
Well, we never stayed inside. You know, we stayed on the property most of the time and went for walks, and I also believe that fresh air is good and all that. So we certainly obeyed the rules. But however, it was not like we didn't open the front door. And you know Shelley well enough that first of all, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Second of all, I just, the one thing about I'm down here in Florida is that, the weather was really good. So you're out moving around and doing things. So, yeah, it's been tough. And we have not, humbly, I say this, we have not been impacted really. I think we knew a handful of people that dealt with it as far as the health point of the virus, and they came out fine. But the biggest issue is we've had many friends that are just, I don't want to say destroyed, but are in almost harm's way with the financial lockdown.
Yeah. And you talk about a double whammy. I mean, this has been an unbelievable situation in that regard. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about, Urban. I appreciate you coming on my podcast. You were a head coach of repute for quite a while, and one of the great head coaches, like I said, to ever put on the headphones, so to speak. I'm not sure how many headphones Newt Rockne had, but you know where I'm going with that. On the one hand, I know you miss coaching a little bit, maybe a lot, but on the other hand, are you also missing this opportunity to be that ultimate leader? You know what I mean, of a group. I mean, it's almost like something a guy like you, I think, would relish, is rising to a challenge like this.
Yeah, I've had many conversations. Ironically, Coach Day and I speak frequently, but also other teams and other organizations. I've had it's been really interesting in my life the last year and a half, whether it be corporate America, whether it be militaristic teams or models or units. I just really, first of all, I love doing it because I love to learn and just learn from others and also share experiences I've had. And I used to get asked this question, Tim, you probably remember that. What did you say at halftime? Or What did you say? What was your pregame speech or something? And I would always tell them that preparation for a game and for a season and for development, that goes on in January through, that's called building a culture. And I've always been a fanatic about, a culture of elite or a culture of high expectation and accountability. And so, for example, when you lose a game, or your best player, Nick Bosa, week 3 against TCU, he's out for the rest of the year. What do you say to your team? Well, you don't say really anything. You just kind of reiterate the fact you've been trained for this moment. You've been trained for adversity, all that. There's nothing easy about Ohio State football. Everything's hard.
Yeah.
And why is that? Because life is hard, because college football at that level, I was speaking to an organization the other day, and I said, before you make any decisions on hiring or, setting your culture, et cetera, first of all, what environment are you in? And at Ohio State football, it's the most competitive environment that I can imagine. You have to win every game. You have to, anything to lessen a competition for the national championship and the Big Ten championship's a failure. Name another. I'm trying to think of something else that's that competitive. So your culture is tested in adversity, and we are in adverse situations right now.
Yeah. This is weird. Did you get to watch The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan
I'm
thing?
mesmerized by it.
Yeah.
We watched the final piece last night, and I just, first of all, it was so well done, and second of all, it's arguably not just the greatest basketball player, the greatest winner in athletics, maybe of all time.
Hey, well, take this as a compliment. As I'm watching that thing for 10 episodes, I keep thinking of you because Michael Jordan was a taskmaster. He didn't believe in wasting time in practice. You watch the whole thing. His whole deal was bring up the lowest guy because sometime or another that guy's going to have to make a difference on your team, and you're only as good as that guy. You know what I mean? I think he believed that, even though he wanted to take the last shot. But you understand what I'm saying? I always thought that was your focus too. But also, don't tell me about what you've done. Tell me about what you're doing, and where you're getting better and stuff. But then you brought up a while ago about the halftime speeches and stuff. Phil Jackson gave you were watching that. He gave some of the blandest pregame talks you've ever seen, right? Yet he knew they had put in the work. He knew they had prepared for the moment, right?
Yeah, as I said earlier, this is really, really great conversation, Tim, is whenever you're making decisions, for example, I'm talking to this one organization about hiring a CEO of a company, and they had me on the search committee. And the first thing you have to ask is, what's the expectation? What's the environment you're in? And what's the competition? Now, I don't know if you remember, it's always been 1 through 5 with me. 1's poor, 3's average, 5's elite.
Yeah.
If Gene Smith has to hire a coach at Ohio State University, it has to be all 5s. There's no room for error. Michael Jordan, what I really appreciated about him, and I've seen many of my friends fail in the coaching profession and really other professions, is because they didn't really evaluate that. They didn't evaluate the environment, the competition, the expectations that you have to. And so I see them fail because they either lower their standards because they let friendships or maybe feelings get in the way. We're all guilty of that. And loyalty. I've let that get in the way, and it's just part of being a human being. But however, when Gene Smith, I tell people this all the time, when Gene Smith hired me in Atlanta, on the job description, it never said anything about friendships. It never said anything about feelings. It said, you're in a high-end performance business that think about going to work every day. You can't stub your toe. If you do, that's a problem. You're 13 and 1, and the commentary is, well, what happened? What happened? You're just, but we sign up for that. Coaches signed, Ryan Day signed up for that. You can't, you can't fail. So I really appreciate the fact that Michael Jordan never lowered his standards. And at times I heard it was funny that they had some of the other players that were, boy, he was tough. And I've heard people say that about Ohio State when we were there. And even now is that, man, that place is a tough place to work. And I'm thinking, why? Just do your job to the best of your ability. You don't have to be here. There's a lot of those 3 places. I call them 3 places because there's a lot of places that, okay, it's average. Average is fine, and have your group hug and go home. But 110,000 people and all those millions of Buckeye Nation, the group hug's not going to cut it. You have to perform. Everyone has to perform at a high level.
Hey, the few times you had to do this, and it was only 9 times, was it tough? And I don't even know if you did. Was it tough to do Carmen, Ohio, after the loss?
Miserable.
Yeah.
Yeah, miserable because you try to focus on the respect of the student body and the alums and the great university that we represented, and your players are there with you, but your heart is just, it's like someone reached in and pulled it right out and stomped on the ground. It's terrible. And I'm glad it was. I think it only happened twice in that stadium.
Yeah. Hey, I've got 100 questions, but I didn't want to follow up on that. Do you miss that? What do you miss most about the night coach? I know you've gotten this 100 times during this month. You've been a favorite guy on a lot of podcasts and stuff, but What is the one thing you miss them? I know it's probably interaction with the players, maybe it's interaction with the coaches. What is the one thing you miss from not being there every day?
I've actually thought about that here because I get asked that a lot. I think what I miss most is the greater good, is waking up in the morning and knowing that there's a greater good out there where, the team ahead of self. I've always been that. I got into coaching for a lot of reasons, and most importantly was building a team and the selflessness. And I often speak on something called Solve the Mystery. And the mystery is, how do I put others ahead of self? And, I think of Terry McLaurin. He may be the most ultimate selfless leader I've ever been around. The Tebow is and these great team. You can't have a great team without that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
I miss that. I miss the players. And then finally, I miss winning. I really, I miss, at the end of the day, I'm watching that Jordan thing. I kind of tear up a few times. And, I think that was us, seeing those buses roll into the Indianapolis or into Dallas, Texas, or into New Orleans, Louisiana, wherever it is. And, you put your arm around those players like I did for 7 years, hugging them as they come walking in because we're getting ready. Got to turn off the world and go to battle together. That's what we're going to do.
Dude, you walked out after winning the Rose Bowl. Well, that's, all things considered, that's pretty damn cool. Hey, what does your crystal ball tell you about what's coming in 2020? What's your crystal ball telling you?
Well, there will, unless something drastic happens, there will be college football. It might look a lot different than we're used to, as far as, number one, as far as stands and people in the crowd. And the second thing, conferences, or who's playing who. And this is going to be, I think Mark Emmert came out and said it. I listened to what he said. And, it's impossible for the NCAA to mandate, because this is all about health and safety of people, and it's state driven.
Yeah.
And, can you imagine telling the SEC you're not going to play because the northwest part of the country is in lockdown? They'd look at you like you're out of your mind. We're playing.
Yeah.
And now what would that look like? Obviously, the experts are going to have to determine that. And I know the ADs and the presidents and everybody are having, and conference commissioners, those are the power players in this whole thing. And, Tim, there is reality. Reality is that there's a financial hardship that will be overwhelming if college football is not played. I mean, overwhelming on college campuses and in communities if college football is not played. And people, I think, are misunderstood that, there's smaller schools that maybe don't count on that that financial boom that happens when, you're making $6-7 million every time the horseshoe fills up.
Yeah.
And much more in television. And that doesn't, certainly it does support football, but my gosh, there's 36 sports. There's so many other things that, I use Ohio State because obviously that's what we're familiar with, but that's across the land. And then also the schools that maybe don't count on that. It's not, if you don't play football, and I was there when I was, and I love Bowling Green, but the economy of Bowling Green didn't count on Bowling Green football.
Yeah.
So this is a real unique time. And there's some people, I pray every night that the people making these decisions are, seek the wisdom from a higher source, because I don't believe people are equipped. You're talking about some serious decisions that have to be made. One's about the health well-being of people, and then also the mental and financial health of people.
Yeah. I was going to say, you brought Bowling Green. I think the Bowling Green payout for playing Ohio State in the opener is $1.3 million. That's a huge chunk of change for an athletic department like Bowling Green.
Tim, that is the change. I mean, I remember those days, and that is that's keeping a program afloat.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, what's the most important thing the players are missing not being around Mickey Marotti and his group right now? And what just, as you think about it, what's the most important thing that they're going to miss? Maybe is it when they get back. What was Mickey really great at during these times?
I've studied the NFL a little bit, Tim, here in the last few months, and what's amazing to me is the National Football League is that they play their last game, and you're not allowed to talk to your players, review the film, get to know their families, train with them, eat with them, make sure they're living right till April, and that was even gone because of the virus. But it's almost like that it's amazed me. How do you build a team when you're not allowed to be around the most important time. People think the most important time is during the season. That, as I told you, that's not when you build a culture. That one, you're going. Culture is built.
Yeah.
That's past tense. Culture is being built before that. So I think that's what, everyone's missing now. You got a new group of freshmen coming in. You had, I think, 13. They had mid-semester guys, Ohio State. And when you get to touch them, when you put your arm around them, when you get to sit and ask them about their families and, really develop that trust that is so necessary. And then the obviously physical ones, Mickey Marani training them. And as I talked to him the other day, is that the nutrition aspect, so much. Some of these players come from areas they don't eat.
Right.
They just don't have the resources to eat. 280-pound man, what that kid has to eat.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of variables right now.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a big difference between 280 pounds and the Mickey Marotti thing, and 280-pound guy just walking around. You're right. The whole thing. Well, just tell me real quick. Give me a preview. If college football jumps off sort of like we think it will, who could be the LSU of this year, in your opinion, as you look around the country? That's a kind of off the cuff, out of left field kind of question, but I think the usual suspects: Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, maybe Georgia. A couple of those guys are replacing their quarterbacks, clearly. A couple of them aren't. But is there a team out there that you think could snake bite some people?
The ones you mentioned are, I see Clemson and Ohio State simply because of the quarterbacks returning, and they're fantastic players. The Alabama, because of it's just the culture and the quality of player and quality of coaching staff there. I think Georgia, because they recruited so well. The team that I've got is Florida. I really believe that they're a playoff contender. They have a returning quarterback.
Right.
Coach Mullen's in his third year. He's a big culture and leadership believer. He's an excellent. Him and Ryan Day are the two best I've ever been around as far as game management and understanding the length of the field, the width of the field, how to create space, how to create matchups. They're tremendous at it. So just the fact he's doing that, I've spent some time with Dan actually down here, and he feels I just can tell, especially a guy I know so well. A little bit like I remember Joe Burrow came to see me last year before the season. We sat and talked, and I remember walking out the door and telling my colleagues at Fox, I said, I'm picking LSU, and I picked them to be in the playoffs because, guys like Joe Burrow or Dan Mullen, those are such competitive, and I know them so well that when I saw their face, they knew they had something special there. And I think the Florida Gators will be right there.
Urban, can you believe the Joe Burrow story?
Isn't it great?
You guys, I'm not saying you took a chance on it, but y'all picked him. Y'all could have gone elsewhere, but you centered in on him, and you know what happened there. But what did you just see just click in him over the last 2 years? What just jumped out at you from the Joe Burrow you saw coming in the door as a freshman?
Well, I saw his maturity and development, and he worked. I remember his first year, he really struggled, but that happened. Mike Thomas, you put Mike Thomas, Joe Burrow, I even put Zeke Elliott in that category. Zeke Elliott, I remember we took him in the it was either the All-American game, I believe. They put him at safety because he wasn't the best running back down there. But the one thing Zeke had is of all running back, him and J.K. was pretty close. Their practice work ethic was I've never seen a back do that. You talk about Joe Burrow, and all he did is work and grind. And we recruited him because he was an elite basketball player, a very good football player. Still was, I believe, Mr. Ohio. Mm-hmm. But his arm strength, his release point, and his release speed weren't great. But Tom Herman came to me and said, "You have to watch this guy." We took a little heat actually when we took him because what are you taking that guy for? And,
right.
He wasn't even offered by. His dream school is Nebraska, and they didn't offer him. And people were – I remember asking those questions, which I could care less about all that stuff. It's our own evaluation. And he had the common denominator that all great ones have, and that's a competitor. But I think LSU, what they did, surrounded himself, let him play, let him do his stuff. I'm hoping that happens at the next level.
Who is an Ohio State player right now that you knew of, that you helped recruit before retiring, that you think could emerge that people don't know of on this Ohio State roster? Who's a guy that might surprise some people this year?
Well, I don't think he'll surprise, but I think he's a potential first-round draft pick, and that's Pete Werner. You know, he's an outside linebacker that, I mean, he's a legit 4-5 guy. He runs, he's tough, he's smart. I don't even know if you remember, but
yeah,
he was my star on kickoff. And those guys, the correlation, someday I'm going to do a study on that, is that what's the correlation? The two areas that I think are the most difficult areas are punt coverage and kickoff coverage. And you look at all those first-round corners, every one of them, from Garyon Conley to Denzel Ward, they were all, where did they make their name? And I kind of saw it coming, is kickoff. And same with Terry McLaurin and his punt coverage. So I just think Pete Warner, you know, I think Sean Wade and Pete Warner are legitimate. They'll be wherever the draft is because they're going to be high picks.
Hey, by the way, before we go, I wanted to ask you about this because hair went up on the back of my neck when you mentioned J.K. Dobbins a while ago, because I'll remember forever the photo I took of you and him sitting there for the team photo in front of the Rose Bowl, and he has tears, and you're kind of consoling him a little bit. And I would think that's the one thing you really miss is, you know, you had an impact on a young man, and he's going to miss you. I mean, do you remember that? And number two, does I don't know, is that a special, one of those special moments as much as winning a game?
Oh, it's, you know, the answer before you asked that question, because you know me for so long, is that is it. And the fact that J.K. Dobbins' personal journey was one that most humans will never know about, because they watch this great running back and a beautiful smile and all that, but we know the journey. You know, I sat with his grandfather, grandmother, his mom, and we talked about his father. We talked about what happened. We talked about the fact he broke his ankle on the first play of his senior year, never got to experience the magic that takes place. So, yeah, of course, I'm going to miss that. And you mentioned a guy that for the rest of my life will be extremely close, and I love him dearly.
Yeah. Hey, Urban, last thing, you know, and I'm going to hit you from left field on this one, but I told you that I didn't think Michael Drake would be around much longer after you retired and stuff. Do you remember him telling you that?
I do.
Have you ever had a moment where you have stepped back and go, man, I wish I hadn't retired? I mean, has there been a moment in the last, I know, you know, I'm hitting you left field for this one, but has there ever been a moment where you go, man, you know, maybe I could have gotten past this physical thing and things could have gotten right again? Have you ever had those kind of moments?
Well, I'm human, so of course, but I'm also, what really would have sat hard with myself, Shelley, and all of us, really the Meyer. When you talk about me, you talk about a group of people. It's not me.
Yeah.
It's a group. It's a tribe, a family. It is what it is. And of course I do. But the fact that the place is in such great shape. I mean, that head coach we got there, Ryan Day, I use the term elite because he is absolutely. When I went to Gene Smith and said, we got the guy and he's right here. And Gene didn't really know him. He knew of him a little bit, but then, you know, I talked to Gene now and he couldn't be more impressed, not just with the fact that he's running a great program, but he's recruiting. He understands Ohio, understands that. Ohio State is different, that everything has got to be on point. Everything. You're talking about academic. The average ACT is a 30. How do you go recruit a kid and say, or not a kid, a team that can compete in the classroom like that place? And then also Columbus, Ohio, you know, you have the Crew and the Blue Jackets. Other than that, it's Ohio State football. Mm-hmm. And so everything, I mean, every time someone sneezes, it's there. And you can't lose. Certainly you can't lose that rivalry game. So if Ohio State was struggling, or we thought the infrastructure was not in great shape, that would really, because this one's always been personal. This has been my home. So it's actually, I feel great about it.
Obviously, you know, I didn't ask you about Jim Harbaugh or anything because who cares? I wanted to ask you this. The most impressive thing, and I was allowed to sit in on some of these sessions too, the real life Wednesdays. Did you have a clue when you started those that they would become not just an enlightening moment for players and sometimes coaches, but just such a solid, huge recruiting tool? You know what I mean? Did you have any idea what you were getting into there when you brought that around?
I did, because the reason the evolution started when my daughter was recruited. and I went to 4 visits with her, and those conversations were not had. It was all about graduation, which is great, but as Gene Smith says, that's an expectation, that's not what the ultimate goal is.
Yeah.
And I knew that all someone had to do was stand up. As I'm giving the parent version now, all someone had to do is stand up and say, listen, if your daughter does this, this, and this, I can promise her that she'll have a job or a career. I would stand up, give them a big hug and say, this is where you're going. Because deep down, that's what every parent wants. They, come on, football comes and goes. Volleyball certainly comes and goes, but that's your kid. And I just want to know that, other than that's not number 26 that sits in the locker room. It's not that at all. And it's certainly not pushing a degree and then, some degree that nowadays a degree is, who doesn't have a degree? A lot. I'm not devaluing it, but that's reality. Yeah. So there's 3 reasons that, and we pushed it through all 36 sports at Ohio State, is that number 1, it's the right thing to do. Number 2 is the recruiting boom that you get from it, that we've gone into Georgia now and beat Georgia. We've gone into Texas and beat Texas. Florida beat Florida. California beat those other schools. Why? I know why. First of all, you can say, well, national championships and draft picks and all, of course, but that's not the final. A parent's not going to shake hands on that. You're going to come because of the real life opportunity that corporate America and Ohio State and this wonderful city, Columbus, Ohio, gives you.
Hey, I got to follow up on that. Do you ever have those moments too where you sit back and go, you know what? I mean, Ryan Day is sharp as heck. He's one of the brightest guys I've ever met in coaching, et cetera. But the legacy you left behind, the legacy that he's now building on. I mean, this may be the greatest recruiting class they're saying of all time from a rating standpoint. That's coming in 2021. But do you ever take? I know you do. Do you take pride in what you left behind? You understand what I'm saying?
Sure. And pride, of course I do. And the one thing that, and
well, let me interrupt you though. You took Ohio State. Ohio State has always recruited somewhat on a national scale, but I always call it, y'all recruited, you got to take care of the home base, but y'all recruit almost a map with no dotted lines on it, if you follow my drift. And that's where you took this, made it a household name in Southern California as much as, Gloucester, Ohio. Go ahead.
Yeah, and we received, I remember early on, because I'm from Ohio, those are my high school coaches. I coached and played in the great state of Ohio. Reality is there's been a population shift. There was a time where Woody Hayes and even Coach Tressel's earlier tenure, certainly Earl Bruce's tenure, where you could fill, the roster. You could say of the 25, we're going to take 18 to 20 from the state of Ohio. And reality is when I was at Notre Dame, Lou Holtz would put me in Cleveland, in Northeast Ohio, Western Pennsylvania. And there'd be a good bunch of, that level player there. And now there's not. Cleveland, Ohio used to be the Northeast Ohio, Warren, Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, and Youngstown. You could sign 10 players out of that area. You can't. Is it someone's fault? I didn't say that, but it's reality. If you fill your team with that, with maybe some work out, some don't. I mean, you got the Corey Linsleys and Johnny Simons, great players from Youngstown, and obviously Marshawn Lattimore from Cleveland and some others. So Teddy Ginn, but not enough to fill it up. And so we made a decision that, I remember when I got hired, even Shelley looked at me and goes, how are you going to compete with the SEC? We've watched the Big Ten on videotape, and it's apples and oranges. You're talking about elite versus pretty good. Mm-hmm. And so we made a decision, Mark Pantoni, myself, I mean, it really wasn't that we got hired to win. We're going to go wherever the players are. Now we have to get them. That's where Real Life Wednesdays came in. So there were no boundaries. You have to take care of your footprint. You have to make sure, because the weather turns, you got to make sure families can come. There's so many variables. But Ohio State right now is the national recruiter in America. And really, them in Alabama, as far as national, and Clemson's there too, but they are the top national recruiter.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you well know, I've known Urban Meyer since he was about 22 years old and could barely grow a beard. And Urban Meyer now is one of the great analysts on television, maybe the consummate analyst when it comes to college football. And Urban Meyer, I truly appreciate you being on with us. And I hope there will be a season this year. I wrote a story about 6 weeks ago for LettermenRow.com saying I could see the conferences just kind of going, okay, you know what? we got 14 teams in the Big Ten. We can have a 10 or 12 team, 10 or 12 game schedule if we want to, intramural, just this one year, take care of business. Do you think that could be coming around the bend here sooner rather than later with some of these major conferences?
No, there's no question. They will play.
Yeah.
And, the Big Ten's got some challenges. You have New Jersey that was hit very hard by the virus. Baltimore, Maryland hit very hard. Other areas, weren't hit very hard. So this is survival of the fittest. This will be, as I used to tell people, when I was at Utah, I voted a certain way on certain issues as far as like college football playoff, BCS, et cetera, et cetera. And I maybe had a little different view than when I was at Ohio State. And they said, well, you change your view. And I said, well, absolutely. My job was at the head coach of Utah is protect Utah at all costs. When you're at Ohio State, your job is, it's very clear what your job is. Protect Ohio State and do the very best you can for that great university. That's what the presidents and, all due respect to other places, in these times, you got to protect your own. You have to do what's right, but protect your own.
Could you see conferences like has been put forth of if all teams can't play, do you penalize everybody because two or four teams can't play? What's your take on that, Urban?
No, you go play. You go find people. It's a little bit like, do you remember when 9/11 hit?
Yeah.
And 9/11 hit, and we were scheduled to play South Carolina. And ironically, Lou Holtz, my mentor, and we were 3-0. Bowling Green was 1-10 or 2-9 the year before. We're 3-0, and the place was rocking, and bang, that hits. And I mean, it just knocked everybody down, and you're like, wow, what do we do now?
Yeah.
But you had to go find that next game. And we knew that we had, we were searching, and you could have got a 1AA or small school. We made a decision. We need to go get a good school to try to get in a bowl game. And we went and picked Northwestern and played at Northwestern. So it was, I think you're going to see that. I think you're going to see teams that if they can't fill their schedule, they're going to be looking.
Ladies and gentlemen, Urban Meyer. Urban, appreciate you coming on my podcast for the first time. Hope it's not the last. And I didn't hit you up last season because I knew you were a busy man, but I may hit you up this year because as I've told everybody, you're as knowledgeable a guy as there is out there in the analyst world. Kirk Herbstreit may be accepted. Don't want to hurt his feelings. But Urban, thanks for coming on, my man.
Yeah, Tim and Austin, you guys, let's do this again. I really enjoyed this.
All right. Appreciate it, man. We'll be back in a moment, ladies and gentlemen.
And we're back with Boston. You know him as Austin Ward. Boston, the old saying I used to whisper to you there in the press conferences every week with Urban Meyer was, don't ask him a question you don't want to know the answer to. And he had a few interesting answers during our little lengthy session there. But the thing that struck me most is he does believe there's going to be college football in 2020, meaning this coming year. What shape it'll take still to be determined. I'm talking about whether it be just conference games only among the Power 5 conferences especially, whether there might be some intersectional play if, in fact, let's say the Pac-12 does do what it's been hinting and goes all conference and drop some of its opponents. We all know that when Ohio State is scheduled to play at Oregon in the second week of September, that I think is Colorado State is supposed to play at Oregon State, which is only 25, 30 miles up the street there in Corvallis. So, there would be an opponent Ohio State could get. University of Houston's supposed to play at Washington State, I think, that same weekend. There'd be some opponents out there if you could make it happen. But I think this is leaning more and more toward intramural conference play this year. The closer you get to this, because you got to have 12 or 14 teams pretty much on the same wavelength. And then when I brought that up to Urban, does that mean necessarily that if it's the SEC only or Big Ten only, does that mean the Big Ten or the SEC has to have all 12 or 14 teams involved? And he basically said, this is about the survival of the fittest. And this is where you kind of have to just kind of suck it up and get through a season any way you can get it done, because there are so many athletic departments. Pretty much every athletic department in Division I depends so heavily on football, revenue generated, et cetera, that you got to figure they're going to figure out a way to play some games. And then, like you and I were talking about on our last podcast, maybe we were just talking about it off the air, there are some contractual obligations that if some teams can play and some can't, I'm talking about contractual obligations with networks, et cetera. They may feel compelled to somehow or another answer those contracts, right?
Yeah, and that's at the top of mind for all these athletic directors and presidents, and then you go onto the TV networks and Urban's new employer with Fox Sports, and everybody trying to make themselves as whole as best they can with these contracts that you want to honor, and there's hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, and the fact that college football players have to put their bodies at risk for that is a whole other conversation. But that's none of these other opportunities exist, and I've made this point to you for the last 9-10 weeks that there will not be 35 other sports played at Ohio State if football is not played. And that's obviously, we're talking about one of the largest athletic departments in the country, and $220 million in that budget. But that comes from football. Men's basketball basically can pay for itself, and everything else is funded by football. And you look at that's Ohio State being a case of the largest, while the smaller schools, and that includes even in the Big Ten when we're talking about implications for Maryland or Rutgers or Indiana, Purdue, whoever. Even if you don't have the most sterling football reputation, that's still going to be what drives the financial engine for these schools. And they need the broadcast money, they need the college football playoff money, they need ticket sales, concession, everything. They need football to be played. I'm not breaking new ground, but
no.
When you look at all
right.
these things, when you're talking about scheduling, somebody asked me last week, and I wrote about those teams you mentioned that non-conference. If Ohio State needs to find an extra opponent, don't forget about Wyoming. They've got the same bye week, and
yeah.
Pac-12 opponent. That'd be a dream.
Wait a minute. I think what you're trying to say is never turn your back on a Cowboy. Go ahead now.
No, definitely do not. Come on. Ohio State in Laramie on October 3rd. Let's do it. But the point is,
I got a feeling that's not going to happen, but I may be wrong. I've been wrong before. Last time I saw Ohio State play Wyoming, it was in the Eddie Robinson Classic in the Ohio Stadium. But go ahead now.
I actually, I know both of the athletic directors of those programs, and I'm not going to get my Christmas wish on October 3rd, just to be clear. But the point is, like, people say, well, maybe Alabama, if USC, if that game doesn't happen, we can get this dream matchup, and it could make tons of money, and people want to watch that. Well, Ohio State has other deals with Bowling Green to open the season, and that they're not going to want to turn around and break that contract to do another one and put somebody else in harm's way, especially.
Yeah, let me interrupt you there too. And like Urban discussed, I think the Bowling Green guarantee for that game is $1.3 million or something, which is that's not chump change in the Mid-American Conference world, and it would not getting that would pretty much lead to devastating the Bowling Green athletic department. Go ahead though.
And they need it because Bowling Green has already cut baseball, so
yeah,
they're already feeling or anticipating an impact, and those are the trickle-down effects that it doesn't just affect Ohio State. But when you talk about the scheduling, that's the multi-million-dollar question right now that we don't know how everyone is going to sort it out, or what will happen if, say, 12 or 14 Big Ten teams are ready to go. I think Urban is much better connected even than both of us in our reporting on this, and he is saying that everyone is going to be full steam ahead. I think he's correct. I already believe that would be the case, but our other colleague who does a little work on the Notre Dame side as well, John Bryce, he's been reporting with what Notre Dame is trying to deal with as an independent. They're getting feedback with their schedules and their opponents, and one thing that he has heard from his sources on that side is that the Big Ten is starting to more strongly consider 9 conference games plus 1 non-conference game. Who knows how exactly that would work out, but that's something that, as the other schools, not just Ohio State, where I think Ohio State is now in a position where they could potentially play all 12 games as scheduled, the way that the momentum is going. But if the rest of the league needs to come to a consensus about how it handles, that's how you would get an idea like 9+1 that maybe starts in the middle of September. As I've said to you before, I don't make predictions about that, and I will defer to all of them because I don't think they need to make a decision right now. But I'm just giving an idea that that's the kind of proposal that's starting to gain some traction.
Yeah, and the point is, we can make this point too. If they can figure out a way to save the Bowling Green game, being that if in fact they can't do it with Oregon, Bowling Green's in the same state, so they'd be operating under the same guidelines of Governor DeWine and Amy Acton and everyone else involved. So that would have a little bit more of a symmetry to it, as far as I'm concerned, about people being on the same wavelength. But you're right. I mean, it's really funny because we sit here in the middle of May, and we don't know what shape the 2020 college football season is going to take. It's folly right now for anybody to say, well, the regular schedule as scheduled is not going to happen, because we don't know. I mean, a month from now, everybody keeps trying to jump the gun, but a month from now, there may be some remarkable improvements in the COVID-19 situation. But like I told you last week, until they come up with a vaccine, you're still kind of rolling the dice a little bit. Number one, with the players, coaches, and the support personnel for a team, much less having any kind of fan presence in the stadiums. And we know that college football, much more so than the NFL, relies heavily on that stadium presence of fans and stuff. But, if you make people 6 feet apart in Ohio Stadium, as we discussed a few podcasts ago, it'd be 15, 18,000 people, maybe max, Well, how many people are going to fit in, Dice Stadium or whatever it's called up there in Evanston now? It's but 6,000 maybe. So there are all these things that I's that need to be dotted and T's need to be crossed. And the first thing you need to know is where you stand with COVID-19. And that's the one thing, that's the chasing the tail aspect of this thing. That's the tail that everybody's chasing, and you're not going to know the answer to that. You may know the answer to that when you kind of turn the green light on.
Yeah, I think the one thing that was missing about, some of the stuff we've been saying over and over every week when we do this podcast, and I think they are definitely important reminders about the difficulties. But when we would have this conversation, the part that was missing was how do the players feel about this? Are they concerned about the risk? Are they willing to make the sacrifices? And, for our beat, we finally got an opportunity to do that last week and get some answers from Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis, which I thought was extremely valuable as we continue to shape this argument that there should be football or that there will be football, because Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis cannot speak for everybody, but they are two of the most vocal, respected leaders on the team. And if they say, which they did, that they are willing to self-quarantine, if they're willing to do the kind of idea that you talked about a couple weeks ago, the first time, which they might have a team hotel for the entirety of the season. At least that's on the table. They'd be willing to do that. The temperature.
Hey, wait a minute. Did you see the NCAA when it came out with this little press thing last week where they were talking about the very same situation, guidelines, et cetera, about everybody has their own room, et cetera? But you're right. I mean, Josh Meyer said, he's gung-ho for playing this season one way or another, not just, devil no care. Wyatt showed a little bit of some concern about how things would be from the beginning. You're right. But go ahead. I mean, that was interesting. They both want to play, but they had a couple of different takes on it.
Yeah, and they weren't, and that was important too, that they weren't going to jump into it blindly. It wasn't that they had disregard for temperature checks or that they didn't want sanitization or that they thought that they should even be allowed to go right back in and have an 85-man practice. They did not think that would be the circumstance. And obviously a lot of this is going to be directed by what they've heard from Mickey Marotti and Ryan Day in the Zoom calls. And, they didn't just come up with their own return to play model on their own.
Oh, sure.
But, they will have had multiple opportunities to hear about the ideas Ohio State and the Big Ten were having and then, be okay with it or not okay with it. And I don't think that Ohio State said, hey, Josh Myers, Wyatt Davis, just go in there and say you're totally comfortable with this and you trust us implicitly. Those two guys think for themselves. You and I have both talked with them on enough occasions to know that they will speak their mind, whatever the situation may be. And, so I think that, the thing that stuck to me was that Josh Myers said he was worried about potentially spreading it to his family. He did have that concern, but that he thinks the self-quarantine and the temperature checks and the fact that Ohio State could monitor them basically daily before they go into the Woody, and that his family wouldn't be around him. That was really the only thing that he was worried about, that if he gets it himself, he said, that would be bad. I wouldn't want that. But his real concern was not he could handle it, but that he wouldn't want to give it to his family. So,
right.
I can't imagine that, like, being a thought 19, 20, and he's got he wants to win a national championship. I think they've got a number of questions about how this impacts their draft stock, but they do have their futures on the line, millions of dollars for Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis. But they've played football their whole life. They've devoted their entire life to getting to this moment where they're at Ohio State, likely going to be their final year of playing in college. They love their position coach. They love their teammates. They love being members of Ohio State. They want to play the season, and any way that they can do it, they're signing up to do that. And I couldn't speak for them before that. They've now said that. We know that that's how two respected leaders of the Buckeyes feel.
Yeah, I just it's just interesting as you were talking there. Like I wrote in that story several weeks ago. If it was just the players and the coaches, you could see feasibly how they could get after it, But then somebody's got to tape your ankles, and you don't want players taping each other's ankles, and somebody's got to bring you water, and will they figure out a way to, like I said, practice with masks on, or I'm sure they'll have team meetings with masks on, but just the whole, and all those people will have to go through, probably continual or scheduled testing, that will have to be done, et cetera. They're just all these hoops you're going to have to jump through to have football. And like I told you, my question is everybody going to be willing? I'm not talking about everybody on a particular team, but is everybody in a particular conference going to be willing and able to jump through all those hoops? I mean, is there even a hotel big enough in State College where you can put a team and give each player and coach his own room? I'm being facetious, but it's not exactly the greatest hotel town in America.
I've never been able to actually stay in a hotel in State College to cover a game, so I wouldn't know what's there.
Yeah. Anyway, where Ohio State stays is a decent little place. It used to be a hole in the wall where teams would have to stay, and it was really bad. But you're right. I mean, that's the point. Is like we were making that point several weeks ago. Everybody's got to be on the same. Got to be bouncing the same ball. I mean, you got to be guaranteeing teams you've sanitized the visitor locker room, that you've taken care as best as you can, seeing that the protocol is being followed at the whatever hotel the team is staying at. Probably slip a few microphones in there too if you need to, but make sure nobody's coughing. but it's just. This sounds almost like it's simple, but the more you think about it, the more rabbit holes that open, that you've got to go down.
And I think that that's one reason why, and again, this isn't a prediction, but if we're just going to follow this one thread, that if the Big Ten goes to 9+1, I think one reason that we're talking about that is that those 9 are already determined, and you don't have to jumble around the schedule. And if you have to make an adjustment for, again, I'm sorry, Rutgers, but you're the most likely one on the chopping block, and the East teams might need to add, another game. Well, then you would maybe have those 2 extra weeks outside of, Big Ten play, those non-conference games that you might lose, where you could try to fill that in with another league opponent. Rather than saying, well, let's try and do all 11 or 12 potentially, and then completely mess up the schedule when you have so many other things that have to go into it with securing travel. Getting hotels, as you said, for State College, some of these other places, they're not the tourist destinations that have, hundreds of hotels like Columbus might available. So, you don't want to start adding more complications on top of something that is already extremely complicated in the first place, which is just setting up, every safety station and ensuring that the locker rooms are ready to go, and mandating how many fans can be there and how many people you're going to let into a press box and all these other things. If you started to put scheduling for staff and police and monitoring parking lots and getting rid of tailgating, and you're changing around the dates, then you suddenly make this a process that is much more challenging to pull off than it already will be. So I think that's why I wouldn't expect to see major changes to the schedule unless they get into a situation where it becomes clear that Rutgers and Maryland, somebody like that, couldn't play an entire season, which I think that part is probably unlikely.
Yeah, I do too. But it's just like Urban said, survival of the fittest. Sometimes you got to, final analysis, you got to think about yourself in this thing. I'm talking about, as a program, as a school, et cetera.
Right.
And that goes both ways, meaning, you know what, we don't want to risk it, And the flip side of it is, okay, they don't want to risk it. We want to play. We think we've got safeguards in place to play. How about you other 10 or 11 schools? What do you think? And then you go from there. And the other thing is, I don't think it'll be hard to find that one opponent. Like if they go to that 9-1 card, like you're talking about, there will be a lot of those ones who aren't Big Ten teams who will be definitely eager to get some kind of guarantee from a Big Ten team to play a game on the road. You got to figure that, right?
Yeah, I don't think that there'd be any challenge to that. And, it might be fun for us to speculate on what Ohio State would do, because if that becomes the model and, everybody winds up in that situation, there could be different teams that could fit in than the ones that we named, which were, as far as I could tell, Colorado State, Houston, UNLV, Wyoming, basically Mountain West teams that were losing Pac-12 games. That situation might open up other options. And would Ohio State in that case, could ESPN or Fox come in and say, here's $15 million to play whoever from the SEC or,
Alabama?
Yeah. Could that put that in play? Maybe. I think that's going way down that rabbit hole.
Well, here's why that won't happen, because especially if we end up with a 10-game season or something, that would be an elimination game don't you figure, for somebody? I mean, it'd be hard to convince the judges, that you lost that game, but you went 9-0 the rest of the way. I think it's going to be very interesting college football playoff situation, which I think is going to go on as scheduled. We'll see if that happens, but yeah, you're right. Money talks in this situation, and there are no guarantees you're going to make the college football playoff field anyway. So why wouldn't you take big cash for a big game? I just remember when Ohio State officials and Alabama were trying to set up a neutral site game, and I think they settled on at one point Nashville. Where the Titans play, and then I forgot who balked. I think they might have both balked, but this was years ago. But they just opted, let's don't do it. And it's so hard to get those big time powers to play each other. It's not hard for me to see Alabama playing USC right now, because in a neutral site, because not exactly apples and apples.
Yeah, and again, like, we can speculate and have fun with who could play, who should play. But we also have our my own rule that I hate to, pin it down. And anybody that speaks out with any confidence about what is going to happen right now, I just think it's foolish. We're still not into June yet. And I think that, the middle of June is really more than anything that time where everybody right now has to work and come up with contingency plans. And I get that. And it would be great if we knew what all of them were, but I think that's hard enough for them to manage when they go through these 7-8 meetings every day, and they're all trying to account for every possible outcome. Well, 99 out of 100 of them won't be used. So I don't know that it makes a bunch of difference if we know what they all are, as long as they're prepared when that moment comes. Because there's a lot of states right now, and especially in the SEC. That believe that their team is going to be back on campus on June 1. Maybe that'll happen for the Buckeyes. Maybe it won't. I tend to doubt that it will. But this thing is not slowing down. Like, there is definitely clear momentum for the season to be played and for monitored workouts to resume. SEC, it's not a surprise, I think, that the SEC is leading that charge, but you're going to see preparations being made for college football to be played in the next couple weeks. I can promise you that around the country. And
I told you, I told you that last week. I mean, the thing is, you want to know an answer now, but then I reminded you, not you, I'm talking about, just euphemistically you. It was still 4 months till the game at Oregon is scheduled. This was last week. And the clock is ticking without a doubt. But, the big question is somebody finally going to step up and go, you know what, by July 1, we've got to know what we're doing one way or the other. Either pack it in, get your all Big Ten conference schedule with maybe one wild card game. A game with an out of conference team, et cetera, and then you go from there. But right now, as you would expect in college football, it's kind of like watching. Different planets kind of like roll around the sun. They've all got their own idea. They're all on their own seasonal schedule, and some of them are getting really close to the sun, I think, with their ideas. May 22nd is going to be a vote, by the SEC on whether they want to open campuses or at least football facilities June 1, and we'll see where that goes because who knows what that will spur across the country, right?
I know what I would bet on for that SEC vote.
Yeah.
I won't name any names, but I have seen already plans for maybe I don't know, maybe it was a school that I used to cover. I know that they have plans in place for athletes to be on campus on June 1. I don't think there's a lot of mystery in the way that vote is going to go. Now, presidents.
Did you cover Wyoming?
I did briefly.
Yeah. Yeah, so, okay, but Wyoming's not in the SEC, so eliminate that team. Did you cover Tennessee?
I did cover Tennessee.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay.
So I think that, I think I have a good idea of which way that vote is going to go. But your point is right. If maybe that's why they're not having the vote on June 1, so that they can tell people on the 22nd, this is happening. And if you want to fall behind the SEC, if you want this to be 2008 all over again, go for it. But otherwise, This is what we're doing. We think it's safe, and we're going to start. And they do have very detailed safety measures in place, and it is not a free-for-all. It's fewer than 10 people working out. It's a lot of things that Josh Myers talked about last week as well, that they're sort of anticipating. It could be the Woody has people from 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, all the way until nighttime, 5 a.m. I'm talking about. And you have to limit the amount of people that are in there. And we also saw just this week, Tim, that the Ohio State coaching staff is now back in the Woody themselves, now on a very limited basis, and a lot of restrictions are in place. But Ohio State's not dragging its feet on this. That's the first opportunity that they've had to allow people to come to work, and they're taking it. That's where this is headed.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the momentum, if you just get your lick your finger and hold it to the wind is blowing, and the momentum is definitely there. And there does come a point where the return to normal is not the correct term, because I don't think we're going to be normal for a long time.
No.
But the return to some semblance of being able to root. I mean, Kevin Harvick wins that race at Darlington. The track is too tough to tame. Does his donuts and everything, gets out of the car, and there's nobody. Well, maybe his pit crew is cheering, but nobody else is. And he goes, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but that was strange. He didn't know what to expect. But you know what? They had a race. They had a winner. They're going to have another one, and life goes on. And, this is that 1 year, you're going to look back on 20 years from now. I hope I get to look back on it 20 years from now. I'll be 86 then, but you're going to look back on and go, wow, that was very, very interesting. Just like 2001 was extremely interesting. Not the same kind of balls in the air, juggling wise, but wow, that was, we got through it. There was football finally, along with hockey, NBA, and NFL all at the same time, but and the Masters and whatever. Everything's going to be jammed in there, but what an interesting year that was. Hope that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that college football really has going for it right now is that timing. As we've said, that you don't need to make a final decision on May 20th or June 1st, maybe. I mean, some of these things are going to start in motion, but you get to see, German soccer has returned. They're actually, even if people don't care about it, it's a meaningful guinea pig for other professional sports leagues and college football, because they're going through this with the testing. What happens when a player tests positive? Because that is inevitably going to happen. And one team had 2 tests and they had to sit out that week. So how do you respond to that? How do you handle the quarantine? Do other players get affected? But just in terms of day-to-day logistics, how many people are necessary for staffing? How many journalists can cover the game? How many photo people are on the sideline? All these things. How many? They have no fans, but all those things are going to go into the NBA's return to play, NHL return to play, and Major League Baseball return to play. And so they'll get to see 3, 4, 5 other options before they have to get into a game themselves and know what that level is like for them. And that's a huge advantage for college football.
Hey, real quick, I was as you were talking there, I was thinking about the media. I think there were 4 media members who were allowed to watch the NASCAR race in the press box. I may be wrong about that number, but you remember they had that extended microphone where they did interviews. Mm-hmm. And my big question was, well, wait a minute, did they sanitize that microphone between interviews? Those little things that pop into your mind that you never even thought of before. Meanwhile, we're used to like being jammed in there like sardines, trying to get so we can hear, Justin Fields talk or J.K. Dobbins talk after a game. You remember those, I call it the almost silence that that has to go into like post game interviews and et cetera. It's really going to be different for us. We'll get into that some other time. But I was just really appreciative of Urban Meyer coming on today to talk about that. He's talked to different coaches around the country about how they're handling their situations, giving them really kind of being for another term, an advice guy for some of their counselor, including, obviously with Ryan Day, he talks to him a lot, but just about how to handle these situations. And I told him, he's probably wishing he was a part of this, because you kind of look forward sometimes as a leader to having these moments of challenges. How do you respond? How do you get your staff to respond, et cetera? And that, and he said basically, yeah, but he's spending a lot of time with a lot of people talking about this whole thing, talking to, basically the way we're doing it, via Zoom, et cetera, and just having really a good time about it. But like I said, before we get done here, he thinks there is going to be a college football season this year in some form or fashion. I think you and I both agree on that, right, Austin?
Yep.
Okay, I called you Austin just so I'd get a response, so you wouldn't have this perplexed look on your face when I said Boston. You didn't know who I was talking to. Hey, Boston, I appreciate it, my man. I appreciate it. And I appreciate Urban Meyer coming on the Tim May podcast. And it's Tim May podcast starring Boston. You know him as Austin Ward. But until next week, ladies and gentlemen, maybe we'll have somebody else, a little special guest on next week. But until next week, this is Tim May. We'll see you then.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Letterman Live, we've got the practice report, we got rapid reaction. Hey, and we got Buckeye IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Berm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.